Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Today, I'm excited to have with us Evan Sohn, who is the CEO of Recruiter.com. I want to hear his story. I know listeners that you want to hear as well. So be sure to get a notepad because I'm sure there will be gems in this episode. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks for having me. A notepad. That's cool. Pen and paper. Good old fashioned, good old school stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, well, you could get the phone too. I take a lot of notes on my phone. I must admit, I use the notepad on the phone quite a bit.
Got it.
Evan, what's your career story? What's the journey? The short story, I must add, the short story to where you are today.
Sure. So I was a programmer through college, and started my first company right out of school in mobile computing. I'm old, so this was like 1989. So mobile in the 90s is not what mobile is today. But grew a company over the 90s, got acquired by Dun & Bradstreet in 98, and have been involved in just really have had the pleasure of and honor of being involved in some great companies, great people, and most recently became the CEO of Recruiter.com in June of 2020. So really at the height of the pandemic.
Wow, that must have been a tough place to be.
Yeah, we kind of knew that when the pandemic would be over, the job market would really be in a tizzy. So people coming and going, and we certainly knew our thesis was that it would be changed forever. We didn't know to what extent, but we knew that it would be changed, and who better than Recruiter.com to sort of help get people back, jobs, and help companies hire people, et cetera.
Oh, very exciting. So when you were growing up, did you think you'd be a CEO, or what was it that was the burning passion?
If you ask my father, he would say yes. My mother also, my mother had a great line. Her line was, just because you say something with authority doesn't mean you're always right.
Nice.
It's a very wise line.
Still applies today, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really taught at a young age not to be not to be an active participant in everything, right? Don't sit in the back and let things happen to you. You make things happen. So in the world of, is a glass half full or a glass half empty, mine is, hey, you control how much water is in your own glass. There's no so I've played roles where I've been the CEO, and I played roles where I'm an individual contributor. It really doesn't make a difference. It's really about, getting things done, setting goals for yourself, and inspiring others to rise up and to get things accomplished.
What do you make of the concept of being in the passenger seat for your career versus the driver's seat, and how does that apply to you on your journey? Can you give us instances where you've been a passenger and a driver, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think when you're a CEO, you're certainly a driver. But I think, life's about learning, and you learn a lot from being in the passenger seat. Don't fall asleep when you're in the passenger seat. Stay awake, watch the driver, watch the turns they're making, et cetera. And, when I think about the rules that I have created over the years, I could attribute them all to different people, throughout that I've met, throughout my career. And it's been a real honor and a privilege to work with just some very, very talented people, really around, throughout the US, over in UK also, but like really worked with just some incredible people.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, so driving, you set your destiny. You have control over what happens. There are no victims in the world, right? It's what you let happen to yourself. And you can create your own, you create your own narrative, you create your own story.
mm, mm. When did you realize you were in the driver's seat?
When I was 21 years old, I started my first company.
Wow.
So really naive, thinking that I could do it. But yeah, that was pretty responsible, pretty early on to take on such a responsibility. We had employees, I think all those things associated there too. But yeah, that's the buck stops there. It's a heavy burden, right? Being the person responsible. It is a heavy burden. Driving the full car, that there is a responsibility there. Driving the minivan with all the kids and all, there's a serious responsibility there. And sometimes you want to be driving and sometimes you want to be a passenger and helping the driver. And you can learn a lot in both sides, and really depends on where you are in life.
And what do you say to people who are on the fence in their careers about taking a risk?
The interesting thing is that when you're so first off, I would say that in the old days, if you worked at a company for 6 months and left, you'd be considered, wow, kind of a flake, right? You worked at a company, it didn't work out. I don't understand what happened, maybe bad judgment, all the things and this is 5 years ago. Today, if I said to you, hey, Simone, what happened? Well, you look, I joined the company and it just wasn't a good fit. So I left. I'd almost go, wow, that's really brave of you. That's really empowering of you to
Mm,
take yourself out of a situation that was comfortable, right? You had a role, you had a job, and you were comfortable doing it, but it was just not a good fit. So I think if that's true, then, the ability to take risks today is far easier than it was, back 10 years ago. I would actually go so far as to say, if you saw a 31-year-old and they had a resume and their resume had one job on it since they graduated college, 5 years ago, you'd probably use words like loyal and committed and steadfast to describe a person that's been at the same company since they graduated school. I think today you would say risk averse, not interested in trying new things. And the reason is, the whole world it's so much easier now to work. You can work anywhere. You could do anything you want. So I just think it's such a great era to go try new things and do things, and take risks. And whether you're doing it full time or part time or a gig or a side hustle, it doesn't matter. Just the opportunity to do things is just so much more, such a greater opportunity to try things out. Really, it's just I'm jealous of this of the work environment today. I just am.
What's there to be jealous about?
So I have three kids, and I think I took off the day they were born, and then I went back to work.
Different
And you have
time.
people now taking paternity leave, and it's just amazing. It's amazing. Because, and I'm jealous, that people could, that there's a group of people who are better at compartmentalizing. The first time I saw a candidate priority being work-life balance over compensation, I was, flabbergasted, right? I grew up in a world where money solves all problems. The
Mm,
answer is it doesn't anymore, right? You're not going to put yourself in a situation where you're not happy. You're going to take yourself out of that, even if it's at an expense. And you're seeing that today, and I'm totally envious of that. Absolutely
mm,
envious of that.
mm, mm.
I would tell my wife, when we were expecting our other children, she would say, what goes through her mind were things like, how am I going to share my love with two kids? How am I going to share my time? All I kept thinking about was more meat, bigger cave. I got to go work more. I
Mhm.
need a bigger cave. I got more kids. Never once thought about, gee, how am I going to share my time between my kids? And it just wasn't. And again, I'm considered to be a very good father, so it's not like I'm not around for them. I'm considered to be a good parent, and yet, I'm really jealous of of the work environment today.
Yeah, it is a different place. I mean, I remember when I was not that I now I'm feeling really old. Um I used to do job hopping. I used to work 1 year, do another job, 1 year, do another job, and then I heard that's not a good thing to do. So then it became 5 years, and then one day it became 16 years at one job. So it's very interesting what you're talking about, how the workplace has changed. But I do, with the work that I do on a full-time basis around diversity, equity, and inclusion, some of those are uh, nuances or biases about uh, what people want in their careers, or how people see them, the package that's presented to them. What are some of the trends that you're seeing from a recruiting standpoint that you can just share with us?
I think that companies are reshaping their organization better now. And let's start from the top. I think that companies are now deciding first what culture they want to create. Is it a hybrid culture? Is it a remote culture? Is it a must be in the office culture? Yeah, they don't have to be all things anymore. They get to decide what that is. And that's also very refreshing, right?
Mhm.
When you're going to a company, what their culture is. Is it you're seeing companies in Europe now doing 4 day a week. What is the culture when it comes to personal life and work-life balance and all these other things? And I find that to be also very, very refreshing for companies to just get, hey, here is what we are and here is what we're not. You know, if you want to work 100% remote, you're not going to go work at JP Morgan Chase because they want everyone back in the office. If
Mm.
you want to work at a company where it's 100% remote, find a company that's 100% remote that gives you those balance, that gives you those things. I think the other is that, in this sort of more people quitting than ever before, rehiring, companies are now making sure that they're hiring with a diversity lens, with a greater diversity lens. We actually have a webinar today today is September 29th. We have a webinar today, I think it's 1 p.m. Eastern time, all on diversity and sitting at the table, getting at the table with lots of different people coming onto it. We have like 200 something people showing up to it. Again, it's top of mind, but it shouldn't just be something we discuss. It shouldn't be a problem we admire. It should be a problem we actually deal with.
Mm, mm. And what do you say to the listener who is looking for a job and wanting to present themselves in the best light from a diversity standpoint? What should they be thinking about when they come to the table with recruiters?
Yeah. So first off, I think that there are more and more people applying to jobs than ever before, right? So uh, it's just so easy to apply for a job. So you got to stand out. You got to do something that stands out. Make sure you are contacting people at the company. Let them know, oh, hi, hey, Steve, this is Evan. I just want to let you know, here's the job I applied for. Love to talk to you about it. Pick your brain about the working environment there. Um, it's better than saying, hey, I need a job. It's, hey, I applied for this job. Do you think I'd be a good fit? Tell me about it, et cetera. So I think letting people know who you are and why you're good for this opportunity is better. Companies don't want to hire poorly, right? They want to hire the right people that align with what their mission is and what their priorities are. And I think making sure that you have that alignment as an individual is important too. So when you're talking to a recruiter, hey, look, what's the company trying to accomplish with this? With this role, right? What are the metrics? What do they need to accomplish? And let me see whether I'm a good fit for that. Because we both don't want a bad fit, right?
Mm,
We want to have a good fit on both sides of it.
mm, mm. Well, let's get back to the meat of this show, which is around the formula for owning your career. So, based on your career, tell me, Evan, what are the key ingredients to be successful in owning your career?
Um, so I have a couple of rules. Let's go through some of the rules. I think always do the things you're being measured against.
Mm,
So as humans, we like to, well, certainly me, we like to feel accomplished, right? We want to feel like we got something done. So we tend to like distractions because sometimes it's easier to get the distraction done than it is to actually get your primary project done. So you could end the day and you could say, gee, what did I get done today? Well, I had to fix this and I had to do this and I had to do this. So I'm doing all the things that I'm actually not being measured against. So if you could figure out what you're being measured against and focus and don't let anything get in your way of those things, that's really like a golden rule. And it's a sales thing, right? If the goal in sales is closing revenue and getting, hitting your number or signing deals, everything else is really just a distraction from getting that done. And if you could, from a career perspective, what are you supposed to be getting done, and are you getting that done, and how much time are you spend getting those things done? Because you actually want to be known as someone who, not that they're good at distractions, who actually is really focused at getting their job done. Simone, I know what Simone, I give her something to do, I tell her to get it done, and that's going to get done. And think about the opposite. Think about if you were a manager and you handed an assignment to someone, and 3 weeks later you say, well, did you get it done? And they go, no, I didn't get it done, but look at all these other distractions I had throughout these 3 weeks and all the things I did. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't ask you to do any of those things. So I think really focusing on what are you being measured against and making sure that's your priority at all times. What are you being measured against, and is that your priority?
How does that take ownership of your career? How does that, if someone asks you, how do I get to the driver's seat? What would you tell them that they needed to do?
Yeah. So, my usual line is, what's your metric, right? What are you supposed to accomplish? Whatever role you're in, like, what is your key metric? And I don't care if you're working in a factory or, coding or marketing or sales, what's the number that which you're holding yourself accountable to? And does everyone else know those number? Lines of code, social images, social media impressions, followers, doesn't matter. And if you make your number known, right? Hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm getting that accomplished. Because you want to be known as someone who gets things accomplished. People let folks drive the car when they know that they know how to get from point A to point B. So and you want to get someone who's not going to get lost along the road. They know how to go from point A to point B.
So what else in the formula? Because it sounds very results driven, and I get that. So you got to be able to prove yourself, get the job done. Yeah. You get keys, you get to drive. What else do you need to do?
I think that, so there are three types of employees. I classify people in three ways. People that can't understand whether they have a problem or not, right? They can't identify that there's a problem, but they know how to execute against what they're being told to do. Hey, go write this up, go change this around. People who could identify there's a problem, but can't really figure out how to map a plan to solve the problem. And then people who could figure things out and solve problems and execute plays. So I think, the people at the top of the ladder there are the people that actually could identify that there's a problem and set the course for fixing those problems. So I think when you think about yourself as an individual, are you someone that could identify that there's a problem? And by the way, just because you identify a problem and you need some help solving it, that's okay too, right? But can you come up with alternatives? Mm-hmm. Hey, should I go A? Should I go B? And you go to your manager, you go to someone that you trust and say, hey, look, I can't decide whether to go path A or path B, but I know I have to choose a path A or path B. So this is all about being in the driver's seat. Driver's seat, I know that there's a problem. I know there's a bump in the road. I know there's a detour. I got to go look at a map and figure out how to get around it. As opposed to someone who just sits there going, well, what's going on? Oh, Simone saw that there's a detour and I'm just sitting in the back watching things happen. And again, I think there are different points in time in life where you actually just want to sit in the back of the car and play games while someone else is driving. That's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? You're part of that vehicle. You're part of that journey. But if you want to be in the driver's seat, you got to be able to identify that there's a problem coming and how do I solve that problem? That's, to me, that's really the simple, those are the simple things. And you're like, gee, this person, so when you hear about someone being over their skis, they can't solve their own problems. That's really what you're hearing. You're hearing someone who's like, gee, they're not at a level where they can actually identify there's a problem and solve a problem. And by the way, there are a lot of people that know that there's a problem and don't know how to solve it.
Mm.
There are a lot of people, gee, there's traffic. I'm stuck in traffic. I don't know how to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Car broke down. I got to wait for someone to come fix it. That's more common than you think. But to really be in that driver's seat, you want to be able to see that there's a problem ahead. Gee, look at that road up ahead. I see that there's going to be a problem. I'm using tools that help me identify that there's going to be traffic on the road. Let me get off the highway sooner, and figure out a better path.
Speaking of paths, for those listeners who want or have aspirations of being a CEO, how does one get there? Take us behind the scenes of what it takes to get to the top position.
Well, look, either you're starting your own company, right? You're starting it on your own, or you are, at the table, right? And you're sitting at the table, you're sitting at the decision-making table, you're at the table, you're helping identify problems, you're helping solve problems, you're taking responsibility, you're taking on metrics, you're sitting at the table. And if you're regularly sitting at the table, sooner or later, someone's going to want you to step up and be at the head of the table.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think when you're in an organization, you got to think about, gee, how far away are you, from the table? Let's go back to that driving on the highway. Are you somewhere in the middle of the bus and have no idea what's going on in the front? Or you're sitting there with the driver, looking at GPS and figuring out, where's the next stop going to be? How close are you to that? And, depending what you want in life, being near the table, being near where the decisions are actually happening, that's going to help you progress along the way. And by the way, that means also taking on responsibility. When someone says, hey, who's available to do this? I am, but I'm available to do those things.
Mm-hmm. And so, Evan, what are some resources that have helped you along the way to level up and to, be in that top seat?
So I read a lot. So, I don't read any fiction. It's all nonfiction. So the hardest things about the hardest things, there's like a lot of good books, a lot of good, and every book is probably a video. The $1 Billion Coach is a good one. $1 Trillion Coach, I think, Bill Campbell. There's some really, really good books. If you're a podcast listener, there's some really good podcasts, not just yours, but other podcasts where you could see how people are thinking. I listen to This Week in Startups a lot. How it got made is another good one where you're really hearing interesting people do interesting things. But I like to learn from other people's mistakes. Always better for someone else to make mistakes than for you to make mistakes. So really, really thinking about those things. And, the internet is just a great source. You're thinking something, you go to YouTube and you pop up a video, right? And, it's pretty good. It's a good thing to do. I also use Blinkist a lot. Blinkist is like good summaries of different things. So if you're thinking about, oh, that sounded like a good book, let me listen to it. Okay, let me go. Now I'll go dig into deeper and read it, it's et cetera. So those are good. The other is like just the recognition that while life might be unique for us, it's not unique for someone else, right? The situations that we're running into might be the first time we're running into those situations, but they're likely other people who've already run into those situations. And how can we learn from them, right? How can we hear their experience and what they actually, what they actually learned from that experience? And fortunately, it's been easier to hear people's stories thanks to the internet. You want to hear from other people's mistakes, right? You just don't want to hear, oh, I got up to the baseball, I got up to the plate and I hit 61 home runs. Sorry, it was last night, Aaron Judge, right? You just don't want to keep hearing about all the great things, right? That's easy to do. What about the hard times? What about the challenges? What about, the company that didn't work? What about the job that you didn't get? What was it like getting fired? Right? What's it like when that actually happens? How do you feel about that when things don't work out the way they're supposed to? what happens when you're thrown out of the car and you got to get back into the car? So I find really good resources online in those regards, and then talk to people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what we ever did without Google and YouTube. It's rote. It is the first thing I do to look for some information, and so yeah, that let's leverage tools that we have at our fingertips. And I would say, to add to what you're saying, Evan, is that we can learn from our own mistakes as well. And I remember mistakes that I've made in my career; they stand out in my memory, and I learn from them. So I think that's another way to learn as well, how to course correct in the car, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. And I totally agree. I think that's what you need to do, is just to think about those things. But, again, I would still go back to some fundamentals and what are you doing today? And is someone, is that measurable? What you're doing today, is that part of what you're trying to accomplish? And what are you doing to move in that direction?
Mm-hmm. Are you still working on yourself when you get, you get
All the time,
the head at the table?
all the time, all the time. My wife is fantastic at this. So, she's very calming, but yeah, always working on it, always working on it.
Yeah, I think you always need to be working on yourself so that you can be better at what you're doing. As you think about your career body of work, Evan, if you had to come up with a title, let's say for a book, if there isn't one, if you had to come up with a title of your career, a book that represents your career body of work, what would the title be?
That's a tough one. I actually want to write a book called 25 Mistakes.
Huh.
So I want to actually get other people to each author a chapter on the biggest mistakes they made, and none of this nonsense of that it really wasn't a mistake, it was good in the end. No, real serious, here was 25 blunders and how not to, and how to avoid them. Here are the things that I did really, really wrong. I think that I love the notion of running a ball down the field. It's part of my one of my superpowers. I have very, very few, is the ability to move a ball down the field. There's really no, okay, here's what comes next. It gets very, very hyper-focused, right? Here's what's next. Here's what's next. Here's what's next. It really, the steps along the way there. So maybe getting from A to Z, something like that, running a ball down the field, something in that sort of genre of, how do you get to the next step, getting to the next step? Because it's always, it's very easy to identify the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a CEO once who drew 2 circles on a line, and he said, see, I did it. There's the problem. And we're just going to connect. I'm like, dude, that's not the hard part. The hard part is, everyone knows if you're at A today and Z is global domination, right? You run a podcast. So you're at A now and Z is, millions of followers and advertisers and all that other stuff. So everyone knows what Z looks like, right? Global domination. Great. But that's not the question. The question isn't what does Z look like? The question is, how do you get from A to B, and how do you get from B to C, and how to get from C to D, and how to get from D to E? And when I see problems, it's typically that you went to go from A to C and you forgot that there was a B, and you're making too big of a jump, and that's okay. But you got to be able to, retrace those steps and go, okay, let's get from A to B, B to C, C to D, D to, it'd be the equivalent of you saying, I'm going to podcast 4 times a day, right? That might be Z, but you're not there, right? And to jump into that so quickly is just too big of a step. So what's the next step look like? And what's the next step look like? So step by step might be a good one too.
Not necessarily linear.
Right? No, not necessarily linear. So that's why it's interesting stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Before we wrap up, do you have any parting words that you'd like to share with our listeners around careers?
Yeah, this is you're going to have multiple, right? So, the day and age of your grandparents having that one job for 25 years and getting the gold watch at the end, that is far and few between. So don't be afraid to try new things. Think about industries that you want to get into, where, I'd rather, if you're trying to get into an industry, work in that industry, do something in that industry. Might not be the job you really want, but at least you're in the industry. And look, you're going to have lots of different jobs, over a lifetime. And this notion of a one-page resume, those are all out the door now. Right. You're going to have lots of different experiences, have those experiences, have really good, exciting experiences that stick out. You were doing things in high school to look like, for college applications, you did interesting things. Life should be the same thing. Go abroad, go work for a foreign country, go work for a foreign company, go do something that's totally out of the normal. Why? Build up these experiences, because that's going to be the difference between you and somebody else in a world where, it used to be that you could have been the best at what you did in your local area, local city, closest to that office. But if the office is remote and hybrid, you're not the best anymore. There's probably someone else there. So, what are you doing to stick out? What are you doing in that regard? And I think it's, just going to be an exciting time for everybody.
Awesome. Well, Evan, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Simone.
Please tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to do so.
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Evan Sohn is my handle. And you can email me at evan@recruiter.com. So that's Evan, EVAN, @recruiter.com.
Thanks so much, Evan. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Simone. Have a great day. Looking forward to catching up in a couple of months. All right.
All righty. Thank you. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.